Welcome back to So I Was Told. If you've been riding with us through the Idol series, you already know that we're not just talking about celebrities or crushes here. We're digging into the things, the ideas, images, people that we put on pedestals and quietly worship. I fully believe that idolization is something that is gnawing at the core of our identity, of our being, especially in Western culture. I believe that if we don't stray away from these idols, it will ultimately see the crumbling of society, if not accelerated far more than it already is falling apart today. So, on this episode, we're going to talk about something trickier and sneakier. Something that can wear the mask of self love while quietly turning into self erasure. We're talking about the cult of healing. Because in the age of hyper self awareness, hyper individuality, and self optimization, healing has become this new religion. And in this religion, the work is the ritual. And the future version of you, the perfectly healed, boundary having, peaceful, glowing you, is the deity that you're trying to become. So let's be clear before we go into this. Healing is good. It's vital, it's necessary. I talk about it all the time. If anything, it's 90% of what I talk about on Instagram. But when healing becomes an idol, we stop treating it like a path and sometimes start treating it like a prison. So let's get into it. Now, how did we get here? How did we start worshiping what we call the work? Let's go back to the 2010s. I was a junior, senior in high school, just about to graduate and go into the real world. And I could remember very vividly my proud hate for self help talk. I can remember being very annoyed at how people wore their mental illnesses like a badge of honor and how everybody around me seemed to want to self diagnose themselves. It was the boom of therapy language on social media, the rise of self help podcasts, the glow ups of journaling, morning routines, and all of the shadow work reels before reels were even a thing. Then, about 11 years later in 2021, the pandemic hits. And it was like the entire world collectively went into this trauma awareness overdrive. According to Talkspace and BetterHelp, therapy signups for telehealth jumped over by 60% in the first 6 months of 2020. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it also isn't a good thing. People were hurting, and for the first time, tools for healing became mainstream. People had so much time that they finally decided for themselves, well, got nothing else to do, might as well start going to therapy. And that was important because that showed that something had shifted. What started as empowerment, unfortunately, I think, became performance. Healing wasn't just personal anymore. It wasn't just a secret. It wasn't something that you wanted to keep low key, that you wanted to keep on the down low, that you were ashamed to show off a whole decade earlier. It was no longer just personal, but public. And again, not necessarily a bad thing. We want more people to talk about healing and trauma, and we want to normalize these things so that we can get rid of these stigmas. That's what most of my page is about. But the way that it was packaged, promoted, and well, some of you might remember some of the controversies surrounding BetterHelp and Talkspace and other similar telehealth type therapy services. Soon enough, mental health, healing, all of that became something that was, well, rather profitable. You see, now healing was something to be broadcasted, something to be monetized, something we use to brand ourselves as conscious and emotionally intelligent, emotionally evolved beings. The work that we do in healing stopped being about liberation and started to be about legitimacy. And if you weren't actively reflecting all the time, actively regulating and rising every day, were you even doing life right? We turned our inner world into a performance arena where we weren't the stars, we were the unpaid labor. Again, I want to press this multiple times here because I don't want you to mishear me. I just said I kind of just poked fun at the whole idea of constantly reflecting, regulating, and rising every day. The question if you're doing life right. I still think very much so that that should be an ideal that we seek to maintain in our life. I fully recognize it as not physically possible, mentally possible, because the life that we're presented with is so constricting, so overwhelming that these ideals of self reflection could lose their meaning. And that idea right there, the reality that these practices, that this lifestyle loses its meaning and soon becomes homework rather than transformative work, is what I want to focus on. So let's talk about the healed self, right? Or more accurately, what we're told it should look like. You've probably seen some form of this online, whether through reels or infographics. But you know that person that is ideally healing in a perfect way. They wake up at 5 a.m., they meditate for 20 minutes, they speak calmly, they set boundaries with no guilt, maybe wear linen clothes, drink warm lemon water. And they've got this fully regulated nervous system that never seems to misfire. This image seems to be everywhere that a course or service is being sold. It's the soft girl, the clean boy, the self aware queen, the everything I post is trauma informed, teachable moment micro celebrity. These people become our high priests. Their lives become our scripture. And somewhere along the way, we started trying to look healed more than we tried to feel whole. Psychiatrist Dr. Jesse Gold calls this, quote, the therapization of culture. When therapy language and healing rituals become social capital, and like all capital, it's used to create a hierarchy, to distinguish the classes, and to fool one another into infighting, to keep us distracted from those who are truly the enemy, those in power, those profiting, those whose greed never seems to be satisfied as they chase those year end record breaking profits. In this hierarchy, we proudly wave these banners that read, I'm more emotionally evolved than you. I've done more work. But you see, this isn't real healing. Real healing is messy. It's terrifying. It isn't fun. It's inconsistent. It can sometimes seem like it's not happening for days, weeks, months, maybe even years. It could come off as boring. It's not always beautiful, and it doesn't always have to look good in your feed. Sometimes healing is just surviving the day. So, hear this, you're allowed to grow without broadcasting it. You don't need an audience to evolve. Now, again, I'm going to insert myself here and remind you I'm not saying don't ever post about your healing. Don't ever talk about overcoming your addictions or being in a better place. We want to celebrate those wins. We should talk about those things. But what I'm doing here is I'm making a distinction between worshiping the work of healing versus actually doing the work. So here's where it gets dangerous, right? Here's where self help can actually become self harm. When you turn healing into a lifestyle brand, when you think that you're going to become the model healer for everybody in your friend group, for everybody that follows you, all 300 people, all 13,000, all 7,000, whatever. you soon start to believe that you always need fixing. Do you hear that? When you turn healing into a lifestyle brand, you start believing that you always need fixing. You start to analyze every emotion, interrogate every reaction, journal every intrusive thought into oblivion. And not just with yourself, but with others. You begin to hold them accountable, your partners, your family, your friends. In short, you become your own surveillance state. What begins as a desire for clarity turns into an obsession with control. Because ultimately, you know what really helps get rid of anxiety, get rid of fear, get rid of confusion? Control. When we have control, we know that we carry with us some degree of safety. That's why addictions are so powerful. That's why I was so deeply addicted with pornography. And my addiction and obsession with porn grew deeper and darker because eventually what I was watching and consuming didn't become enough. I needed something more taboo. I needed something more dark. I was looking around me at everybody who was proudly waving their I'm so sexual banners, that I'm into BDSM, I'm into this kind of kink, that kind of kink. So every time I was overwhelmed with anxiety, had something big coming up, some public speaking or whatever, I couldn't work until I watched porn for an hour or two because it was something I could control. It was something that I could look for and decide for myself what was satisfying enough. Again, what begins as a desire for clarity turns into an obsession with control. Don't believe me? A 2021 study in the Journal of Positive Psychology found that overuse of self help strategies like excessive journaling and constant self monitoring correlated with higher anxiety and perfectionist thinking. Why? Because it reinforces the idea that you're never there. You haven't made it yet. You're not where you should be yet. You still have so much work to do. That idealized version of yourself still someday there, but not yet soon. And so you start to believe that discomfort means you failed, that the presence of sadness means you're still broken, and that unless you're actively doing the work, you're falling behind. But here's the truth that I want you to hear: healing that demands perfection is just another form of self harm. That goes for your career, your hobbies, your religion, spirituality, your art, all of those things. Anything that demands perfection is just another form of self harm. Today, we're just talking about healing. Why? Well, the idea of perfection is profitable, it's tantalizing, it makes good advertisement because the wellness industry needs you to stay broken. If you're all better, there's nothing more to sell you. Pull back the curtain and suddenly it becomes less spiritual and more sinister. The Global Wellness Institute reported that the wellness industry was valued at $4.4 trillion in 2022. That includes everything from therapy apps and juice cleanses to $10,000 retreats and influencer run healing courses. So let's be real. If you actually healed, they would lose a customer. And so they sell you an endless pursuit, a never fully attainable, healed self. One you can only get closer to by paying more for premium services, taking more steps, making more content, showing off more upgrades. These oligarchs monetize your insecurity and call it empowerment. They dangle the fantasy of high vibe living in front of you and say, you can have this too. You could have this quick. You could have this easy. If you too just buy this product, just book this call, just download this app. And what's crazy is that all of us, to some degree, have already started to internalize that logic. We think, if I'm not buying it, I must not care about healing. If I'm not growing, I must be failing. Apps are great. Books are great. Please read more. For crying out loud, please read some good psychological books. But it's when you think you'll never be good enough until you've read everything, or until you have every app, or until you keep up with every practice, take every course, that you'll never be perfect. That's where the fault lies. That's where the idolization thrives. So, where do we go from here? Because it sounds like all these good practices we should be taking in are now things we should be avoiding. Once again, for the last time, I'm going to reiterate, you should be healing. You should be taking these things seriously. I strive all of the time to have a healthy lifestyle at the forefront of my mind. I strive all the time to speak life into people. Even more recently now, I'm trying to watch what I listen to, what music I listen to. I'm finding more that music about constant sex or sexual things or partying or drinking, substance abuse, anything that essentially talks about like falling into these ways of living that just easily distract from the reality of life subconsciously influences how I want to live my life. So, where do we go from here? Knowing that we should strive to be that way, knowing that we should strive to have more healthy looking, mental health oriented apps on our phone, knowing that we should ask ourselves more introspective questions daily. Again, this episode is about idols. This series is about idols. And so, where we go from here is by smashing those idols. We stop worshiping the fantasy of the healed self, the one that never flinches, the one that never spirals, our version of self that never needs help. That version of you isn't real, and they don't need to be. Sometimes it's chaotic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's not soft and very hard. It doesn't need to be optimized. Sometimes healing is ugly. Reject this consumeristic, parasocial healing culture because you don't need more content. You need more compassion. So here's 3 easy questions you can try asking yourself this week. Am I healing or am I performing healing? What version of me am I trying to impress? And lastly, would I still be doing this if no one ever knew about it? Remember, the truth is you don't owe anyone a performance, not even yourself. If there's anything that I would love to be ingrained in your brain this week, it would be that you are not broken. You are not behind. You are not a failed version of your future self. You may have made some grave mistakes. You may have done some stupid things. You may very well in this moment be deeply addicted to something that you know is destroying a lot of things in your life. But I want you to know you don't have to be constantly fixing yourself to be worthy of peace. You can have that peace right now in knowing that you are worthy of health. You are worthy of healing. You are worthy of love. You don't need to earn your rest. You don't need to brand your breakthroughs. You are allowed to simply exist, to be flawed, to be real, to grow slowly and quietly like something rooted or unbothered by who's watching. So take yourself off the altar. Burn that blueprint of the healed self, because you were never meant to worship a version of you that doesn't even know how to breathe. You are meant to live here in this moment, to know that you are becoming, and that is holy enough. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of So I Was Told. In case you didn't know, this is actually the 3rd video in a 5-part series on idols. So if you came here and you haven't heard the first 2 episodes, I'd highly encourage you to go back and listen to them. They're in order, so you can just scroll down a little bit to find those other episodes. Now that we've unpacked the cult of healing, I think it's important that we recognize some of us have just left one cult only to join another. The cult of us. Next time, we're talking about what happens when you put a lover on a pedestal so high you can't even reach them. Or worse, when you become the pedestal. Till then, keep healing, keep growing, and never give up.